Welcome back to Naked History Debrief, our comfy chair after the main episode where we tuck in the corners, chase the fun facts down the hallway, and tidy up the small myths before they calcify into big ones. Tonight, we're carving into the late-night add-ons, parades, pardons, cranberries, football, and who actually washed the dishes at the first meeting. Then we'll sprint through This Week in History and cap it with Menu Archaeology, delving into pumpkin and mince pie glow-ups and the regional side dish wars still raging under the tablecloth. So let's go ahead and get on into it. We like to begin every debrief with naked regrets, a time to be able to peel back the curtain on some of the things that may have not made it into the main episode, or things that I need to add some correction to. Let's start curbside on 34th Street. The Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade didn't emerge from Plymouth, it came from immigrant joy and department store theater. Early parades blended store employees in costumes, zoo animals, and marching bands, but the real icons were the giant helium balloons that debuted in the late 1920s. First, they were a bit fragile, then famously unruly. In the early years, Macy's actually released some balloons after the parade and offered cash rewards to whoever found them and returned them. Cue a handful of chaotic recoveries, including runaway characters snagged by fishermen, torn on rooftops, or just drifting out of reach like myth creatures looking for a new franchise. Today's tethered giants and tight safety rules are the grown-up version of that same spectacle instinct, a parade whose job is to kick open the season and sneak Santa into Act 3. Now, a tradition that most of all of us are familiar with is the presidential turkey pardon. Now, we love a good ritual with a punchline, but the tradition of presidential turkey pardoning is younger than most of the carving knives in your kitchen. Presidents received presentation turkeys for generations. Sometimes those birds met the smoker, sometimes they didn't. The modern formal pardon enters in the script in the late 20th century and becomes an annual White House beat starting in 1989 with George H.W. Bush. Before that, you'll find jokes, photo ops, and plenty of ambiguous fates for the gifted gobblers. The current bit, two birds, goofy names, online polls, very school field trip energy filled, is political theater at its friendliest. A non-controversial laugh, a moment for bad poultry puns, and a chance to put mercy into a headline once a year. Now, most everyone adores cranberries, and there's the story that they were on the 1621 table like a brand identity lockup. The reality taps the brakes a little bit. Now, cranberries were native to the region, yes, but the sweet sauce we know and love depends on sugar, which at that time and place was scarce and pricey in the early colonial New England. What really puts cranberries into the national holiday lexicon and enshrines its status on every Thanksgiving table is the 19th century menu industrial complex. You have magazines, cookbooks, and later the wonders of canning and mass distribution. By the time that the perfectly ridged cylinder of sauce becomes the cultural meme, we're deep into modern times. The berry is old, the shiny red ritual is just an industrial age flourish. Now, a quick correction from the main episode on who actually washed the dishes in that first meeting in Plymouth. Now, our main episode flagged how few adult English women survived that first Plymouth winter. Logistics at any feast are labor, and labor has names. In 1621, cleanup and cooking almost certainly involved boys, girls, and men as well, basically anyone with hands. We also do need to retire the image of Wampanoag guests being waited on. Their role included provisioning, which, remember the 5 deer, they also brought presence and political performance. Hospitality is a two-way current, and the invisible workers in any origin story are usually women and kids, with neighbors drafted when the pots got too heavy. So, unfortunately, there are no historically verified names for these people. But if your family tradition assigns dish duty by guilt alone, consider the historical accuracy method. Everyone clears 3 items, and the person who told the longest story scrubs the roasting pan. It spreads the work out evenly and doesn't make too much of a hassle, and it also gives you some extra minutes for that wonderful, wonderful couch nap time. Now we finally get to the one that most everybody's fathers, uncles, brothers even get into, and that's football. Now, the gridiron doesn't hitch itself to Thanksgiving until the late 19th and early 20th centuries, first through college rivalries, and then the NFL cementing the day with marquee matchups. It's not sacrilege, it's just another late add-on, one more way the holiday became a bundle that mixes domestic ritual with public spectacle. If your house times dessert to halftime, congratulations, you are participating in a tradition invented by radio producers and sports promoters who understood that the nation loves a second course of narrative tension. Now let's take a step back and look at this week in history. From November 10th to the 16th, there's some big names. On November 10th, 1775, the U.S. Marine Corps is founded. In Philadelphia's Tun Tavern, the Continental Congress authorizes 2 battalions of Marines. It was part recruiting and part strategic flexibility. Sailors who can fight with rifles from the rigging and make amphibious landings possible. If you've ever heard of a Marine toast the Corps' birthday, this is the cake that they're cutting. On November 11th, 1918 is Armistice Day. The guns fall mostly silent at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, ending World War I's Western Front fighting. The U.S. will eventually rename Armistice Day to Veterans Day in 1954, widening the honor from World War I's end to all that have served. It's why today's parades and ceremonies center living veterans, not just the fallen. That is Memorial Day. On November 12, 1957, Laika updates. The Soviet Union's Sputnik 2 launched Space Dog Laika on November 3rd, but through November 12th, official broadcasts claimed that she was still alive. Only decades later did insiders confirm that she died within hours from overheating. It's a sober milestone in space history. It was a triumph on paper, but a tragedy in the capsule, a reminder that the space race often wrote its own PR before it wrote its obituaries. On November 13, 1982, the Vietnam Veterans Memorial is dedicated, a stark black wall in Washington, D.C., etched with names. The design reframes national remembrance. It's minimalist and unadorned, participatory as visitors touch the names, changing how the country mourns in public. On the 14th of November, 1889, Nilly Bly begins her 72-day world dash, a reporter with a suitcase and a bet launching a race around the globe. Was it a stunt? Sure, but it's also a flex of women's journalism, speed, and the technologies shrinking the planet. On November 15, 1988, was the Buran's only orbital flight. The Soviet space shuttle does one automated loop and lands with no crew. It's a Cold War echo that reminds us that innovation sometimes flashes once, but still changes the conversation. And finally, on November 16, 1532, Atahualpa is seized at Cajamarca. Pizarro's ambush captures the Inca emperor. It's a hinge moment in the Spanish conquest of the Andes and a snapshot of tactics, tech, and the audacity of rewriting a continent's power map. A new segment on this debrief is going to be Menu Archaeology, where we dive into the history of the food on your Thanksgiving plate. Let's excavate dessert first, because everyone likes a good first dessert. Pumpkin pie starts as a flexible field. Sometimes stewed pumpkin is poured into a crust. Sometimes pumpkin custard is baked into the pumpkin itself. Sometimes it includes a spice blend that would confuse the modern pumpkin purist. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, we see stabilizations of the flavor profile, including a cinnamon-forward taste with cloves and ginger notes. Evaporated milk is included, smoothing the texture, and a factory-reliable crust is introduced as domestic tech improves. What we call classic is really consensus, negotiated by magazines, test kitchen, and the physics of canned goods. Mince pie, on the other hand, is a shapeshifter. In early modern kitchens, mince meat meant exactly that. Meat, chopped fine and married to dried fruit, spices, and wine or brandy as preservation. Now, over time, the meat recedes in many American homes, leaving the fruit spice matrix to do all the nostalgia work. Some families keep the old ways with a whisper of beef or mutton for depth. Others prefer the bakery case jewel, sweet, boozy, with no barnyard. Either way, mince is a trade route in a crust. Spices that once cost the earth are now standard issue holiday perfume. Now, for the regional side dish wars. Now, from the Mid-Atlantic and the Gulf is oyster dressing. It comes in to give a sea-rich and holiday fancy vibe to your Thanksgiving table. In the South, cornbread dressing comes in, gets a crumbly, savory, and sometimes sage or little hot kick to your meat and potatoes. Now, alongside the Thanksgiving turkey, you either have stuffing or dressing. Now, this is a debate happening across the nation on multiple Thanksgiving tables. My family is firmly side stuffing, but the debate is mostly vocabulary. Stuffing is what's inside the meat versus dressing, which is outside. But it's also a little bit of identity. What your grandmother called it, what your grocery list says, and whether anyone will fight you if you add andouille. The punchline is both are correct, both are delicious, and both are newer than the history suggests. Two beloved latecomers prove that food marketing writes history too. Sweet potato casserole with marshmallows is a pairing that goes mainstream in the early 20th century, when marshmallow companies pitch recipes to make their fluffy new product a household staple. The dish sticks because it tastes like a cozy candy bar to some people, and because America adores dessert masquerading as a side. Personally, sweet potato casserole and marshmallows are two things that kind of clash for me. You can have sweet potatoes and you can have marshmallows. Don't mix them up. It tastes weird. Now, another side that joins is green bean casserole. A lot of casseroles, mainly just because it's easy to throw everything together. Now, that comes in 1955, courtesy of a test kitchen and condensed soup alchemy. You have 5 ingredients, 1 can, and eternal potluck salvation if you can't think of anything else to bring. Both are modern, but both are now traditional in the sense because repetition plus nostalgia equals canon. Now, the through line of our menu dig is simple. Tradition evolves. What lands on your plate is a braid of necessity, technology, price, persuasion, and habit. When we say this is how we've always done it, and we really mean this is how we started doing it when somebody clever showed us a better shortcut, or when someone we loved made it that way once and our hearts decided that that was the recipe, it's not a downgrade, it's the human part of everything. The food is good because the story is good, even if the story keeps getting some edits. And that is our plate cleaned. Myth gravy mopped, cranberry conspiracies confessed. If tonight tweaked your family lore even just a little, that's the point. History tastes better when we season it with sources, not just nostalgia. Now, before we roll the credits, there's 2 quick courses for your mind and your money. First off, if this episode stirred you, consider learning from and supporting native-led work year-round, not just during the turkey times. Organizations like the American Indian College Fund, Illuminative, and the National Indigenous Women's Resource Center are just a couple of organizations that help contribute to Native lifestyle and memory. I'd also like to give a shout out and a little bit of a book recommendation to our sources for the main episode and the debrief. This Land is Their Land by David J. Silverman and An Indigenous People's History of the United States by Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz. Both were pretty critical in giving the necessary information for both of these episodes, so I just want to give them a shout out, maybe put them on your reading list. Also, something that you might want to check out is the Smithsonian and National Museum of the American Indian articles on their website, give you a little bit more of an insight as to the culture and history that helped found this nation. Now, before we go, if you learned something new, tap follow, rate the show, and text this episode to the cousin who just knows that the family stuffing recipe is from 1621. If you will, drop your family's strangest traditional side in the comments. The best one gets immortalized in a future debrief and maybe even gives you a tasteful brag at your Thanksgiving dinner. On the next Naked History, we're going to be talking code talkers. We're dialing into the Navajo, Choctaw, Comanche, and other code talkers who turned identity into encryption and silence into strategy. Bring your curiosity, and we'll bring out the field radio. I've been Dylan Gassaway, and this has been Naked History Debrief. We'll see you next time, but always remember, until then, stay weird, stay curious, and stay naked, historically speaking. Have a good one.